Morning, everybody, and welcome to our Jobs Foundation online briefing looking at the impact that national insurance rises might have on businesses across the country and especially on their ability to generate jobs. I can see that our attendees are trickling in. It's just gone 9:30, so we'll give it just a few moments more for people to join. But aside from that, we will kick off very shortly. Um, I'll introduce you to all of our panelists very briefly. I won't try and steal any of their thunder by trying to explain their businesses because they'll all be able to do a much better job of that than I can. But to kick off from a Jobs Foundation perspective, the Jobs Foundation is really here to champion business for its role in creating employment and training for people across the country. We know that a good job is the number one lever that we can use to help alleviate poverty. So we're really here to support businesses to create as many new jobs as possible. And as part of this, we were very delighted to see the government announce the Get Britain Working white paper at the tail end of last year. And alongside that, the associated ambition to boost the employment rate to 80% and bring 2 million more people into employment. But we know that businesses are responsible for providing 80% of the jobs across our economy. And we know that at least 1.2 million more jobs must be created if the government wants to achieve its ambitions on employment. So because of this, it's absolutely vital that we have a policy environment that both allows businesses to thrive so that they can then go on and create those jobs that will change so many people's lives. Before the election in those heady days, just over 6 months ago, Keir Starmer stated that growth must become Labour's obsession, and Rachel Reeves stated that wealth creation will be the defining mission of the next Labour government. But I think it's safe to say that since then, the relationship between the business community and the government has somewhat changed tone, with prominent business leaders and the UK's biggest business groups all going on the record to express their concerns at things like changes to national insurance contributions for employers and the employment rights legislation and the impact that that could have on their ability to generate jobs. We've seen a few interesting recent news stories on this. So the British Chambers of Commerce has found from their research that a record level of business leaders are now concerned about taxation. And polling last week from the Federation of Small Businesses has found that over two-thirds of small businesses now state that they plan on recruiting fewer staff over the coming year. But rather than read about this through newspaper pages or news reports, we wanted to actually get to the heart of how these changes will impact businesses and different types of businesses operating in different parts of the country. So it's really great to have Philippa, Andrew, and Christopher all join us this morning to talk a little bit about how these changes will impact their businesses in particular. So in terms of structure for this morning, I will ask each of our guests to introduce themselves before opening a short discussion, and we'll then open up to questions from the audience. So all of our audience members, please do pop any of your questions in the Q&A box as we go through our conversation this morning, and we will get to them very shortly. So just to kick off, I'll ask each of you to introduce both yourselves and your business. So Philippa, I don't know if you want to start.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Philippa Keith, and I'm CEO of MSP Organisation, which is a corporate services group. So we provide, as it says on the tin, corporate services for a number of businesses. So the company secretarial, the compliance side, accounting support, and payroll, which is obviously why I'm here this morning. We offer leadership and development, marketing, the culture, the values, and we also do personal payroll as well as corporate payroll. So on the payroll side, we're a payroll bureau, and we've been going over 30 years. And that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Brilliant. Andrew.
Yeah, hi. My name is Andrew Linus. Managing Director of Linus Food Service. So this has started 70 years ago with my grandfather as a fishmonger. We are based here in Coleraine in Northern Ireland. If you've heard of Bushmills whiskey, or if you know that the British Open is coming to Portrush, we are about 3 or 4 miles away from that. In a nutshell, what we do is if you eat a meal out of home, we are the people who are supplying those pubs, restaurants, coffee shops, schools, hospitals, prisons. So we've about 5,000 customers. We've about 5,000 different products from frozen, chill, ambient, fish, meat, non-foods, anything you can imagine. And we operate in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, and in Scotland. Of about 700 staff, and we'll turn over about 200 million.
Thank you, Andrew. And Christopher.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much, Jamie, for inviting me here, and thank you, Jobs Foundation, for organising such an excellent topic to be discussed, very pertinent right now. My name is Christopher Nieper, and I look after our family business. We've been in Derbyshire, in Alfreton, for 63 years. We're a fashion company, actually, a fashion manufacturer and retailer. We employ 300 staff. And quite unusually for a small business, we also have an education trust with 210 staff and 1,250 pupils. So we're responsible for education of children from the age of 3 to 19, and a key part of this is how can we get these young people into jobs to make sure they're economically active and well prepared for life beyond the school gates.
Thank you very much for those kind words, Christopher, and thanks to all of you for making the time to join us this morning. It's really great to have such a great variety of different businesses and different sectors in different parts of the country. But to kick off into the substance of our discussion, obviously, before the current challenges that are facing businesses that have came up in the past few months, the last few years have been characterized by a set of different crises. So from the COVID pandemic, the big inflationary spike that we've seen, the political instability that we've seen. So what has it been like from your perspectives about running a business over those past 4 or 5 years? Christopher, I don't know if you want to kick us off on that.
Well, I think the last 4 or 5 years has been some of the most challenging ever, certainly in my 35-year career here. And the two really tough things there have been COVID and then inflation. COVID has upset the balance of demand, really. We turned our factory over to supplying the NHS. We clothed 40,000 healthcare heroes during the COVID crisis. And in order to do that, we had to put our own customers on hold, which, of course, damaged our demand. But I felt we were doing the right thing for the country in its hour of need. But probably even more serious is inflation, which has followed, going up to 10, 11%. Was it last year or 18 months ago? And that has meant we've had to put up prices very, very substantially. It's also led to the minimum wage going up very substantially over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think the whole economics of running a small business is quite different today from what it was in 2019.
And that's a really nice summary. Andrew, Philippa, is there anything you want to come in on those fronts?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, I mean, when you lose 90% of your turnover in 10 days, I don't think anything can be as bad as the national insurance rises. So, I mean, COVID and obviously in our industry, no one ate out and hospitality collapsed. The only other one I'll add that again is Northern Ireland specific is obviously the protocol and Brexit. So it's been a huge challenge for us. Yeah, getting goods in from GB and figuring out the complexity of that and the uncertainty of the last 3 or 4 years in that. At least we got a little bit of certainty, but that's been a huge one. But Christopher hit the nail on the head on the other two.
And Philippa?
Yeah, echoing what's gone before, but the furlough payments were a huge challenge, shall we say. So we were fortunate we didn't furlough anyone, but a lot of our clients did, and the lack of clarity on how the furlough worked was an immense challenge that for all of our staff. Yes,
I think that's a really interesting point, Philippa, because for most people, furlough was the thing that kept their paychecks or their family and friends' paychecks coming through over that pandemic, whereas we never really heard much about the other side of it and the kind of complexities of navigating all of that. But I think it's safe to say that on the 23rd of March, when we all went into lockdown, we didn't think that the climate for operating a business or a small business in 5 years' time would be anywhere near as difficult as it's been over the past 5 years. So all credit to all three of you for so successfully piloting your businesses through those periods. But coming to the present day, Obviously, the government elected last July, Rachel Reeves in her October budget announced that they would be increasing the rate of employers' national insurance contributions from 13.8% to now 15% from the new financial year. And I think it's safe to say that that has not went down well with the business community at all. You've seen groups like the CBI and the Chambers of Commerce come out quite strongly against this, talking about the impact that it will have on job creation, about the impact that it will have on wage growth, all of those very important things. But from the perspective of all three of your businesses, what kind of what was your initial reaction to hearing Rachel Reeves stand at the dispatch box and announce those changes? Philippa, if I come to you first on this one.
Oh, I think your heart sinks because a lot of small businesses, your margins are not that big. And the success of our business depends on our employees. So you want to reward them, and giving any having a look at what pay rise you're going to give, and then seeing actually can you afford to do it, because you've got to Christopher saying about rising prices, you have to have a look at that. But any pay rise you're giving is actually, you've got to take that into account, the increased NI. So what can you do? So it is the employees who suffer, which is really, I think that's very sad because they're the ones that do all the hard work.
Andrew, what about yourself? What was your reaction?
It was pretty depressing. I think both the rising of the percentage and the lowering of the threshold. So I think about it, obviously, massive impact to my own business. Minimum it's 500,000 of extra costs to us. So where do you find that? And actually, it could have been worse, but for the staff we have in the Republic of Ireland, who there was no rise to, but for hospitality, which is my customer base, that lowering of the threshold really hurts those who are part-time staff. And so I think the ripple effects of this, on the day, it was like, that's not great. But I think the ripple effects is people have really understood the numbers for their business, understood the numbers for their customers, for me, my hospitality customers. But the wider effects, Jamie, I sit in the church board, which is a charity, and they're going to have to find 30 or 40,000 extra in the church. And it's crazy. And I have a good friend who's a GP. His GP surgery has to pay for it, but yet the hospital doesn't. It's the complete lack of joined up thinking. And I do feel quite strongly, but it is this sense that you can just bleed business dry. And Philippa makes a point that margins are so tight across all of our industries, and we want to give those pay rises. And this is a jobs tax. Let's call it what it is.
Completely. And I think for somebody on the median salary, these increases equate to roughly kind of 4% increase in a business's costs, which exactly as you mentioned, their industries like hospitality, that's for many people that's kind of their entire profit margins there. So you're looking to kind of squeeze other avenues to find that back in your costs. Christopher, what about you? How did you react to Reeves's statement in October?
Well, this is not about bashing the government. We have to support our government, who have a very tough task ahead of them. But we do now find ourselves with a crisis of confidence in British business, and many businesses are not in growth mode; they're now in survival mode. That is a tragedy, because if the Chancellor needs to get more revenue in, we're unfortunately going to end up with less revenue. And for us, there's a strong message from the government. Stop manufacturing in Britain. Don't bother employing people. Just offshore the whole thing, because that way it's cheaper.
And I think that's a sentiment that we've seen come up from a range of different businesses. So on that point there, what do you think the impact will be of these changes in terms of things like outsourcing, in terms of things like offshoring, in terms of things like automation, all of which are things that have been talked a lot about, but has that been something that's came up in the business planning that all three of you are doing? Andrew, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I think the big area that we've, accelerated on is AI and what can we do there. So in terms of ordering from our customers, so some of that's really customer centric. So there's good things. It forces us as business, to figure things out and solve problems, which is what we do. But yeah, I think for us, AI and elements of automation, but again, for our customers, for my hospitality customers, they're looking at, well, how can we place orders? More people are using the screens to place orders because they're having to take some element of costs out of their business. But how does that affect the hospitality? People like buying from people. So there is that real challenge. And Christopher said it in his industry of manufacturing and right across the board. It's like, well, you figure it out seems to be the answer. Whereas, all of us will have to maybe cut spending or look at different parts of our budget. And I think that will be the challenge back to the government, is do the same on your side in terms of spending. That's that frustration. But I think AI is exciting, but it's how does it work in everyone's individual industries?
I think lots of businesses are still figuring that out, aren't they? Philippa, I can imagine that AI is an increasingly relevant and topical thing for some of the work that you do. Has that been something you've kind of looked at more as a result of these changes?
We were already looking at AI and having how we can use it and how we shouldn't be using it as well, because it is not the be all and end all. It's not the answer. But having a look at it, there are some benefits there. Andrew mentioned efficiency. We're having a look at how how AI and IT, how we can streamline everything. Obviously, we do hope that outsourcing increases, because that's what we do. So that is one good thing. But we do a lot of payroll for the care industry, for nurseries, and they're really, really suffering because they don't have large margins anyway. And it is the people who are on lower wages are having their hours reduced to try and counteract the effects of the increased of the NI costs. Because we find a lot of people are part-timers, so they're below they were below the threshold. So it makes a huge difference to those businesses.
On that point there, Philippa, obviously, there's two big, as all three of you have alluded to, there's two big changes to national insurance contributions. There's both the increasing of the rate, but there's the lowering of that threshold. I think all the headlines and much of the media focus and the campaigning focus has really been on that headline rate. But as all three of you have said, the changes to the threshold in many ways are just as important. I wonder if any of you have any thoughts on what's the kind of most significant change, what might be most damaging, and kind of whether either of those changes are kind of easier mitigated than the other.
One of the things that we're finding is that one part of the payroll we do is we do household staff, which is really nannies, your nanny or your carer for your parents. And those people are having their hours reduced to counteract the increased NI costs, which benefits no one. But also, we do a lot of payrolls for nurseries with a lot of part-time workers, and so the threshold reducing is having a dramatic effect. And we've got one nursery where the owner just says he cannot retire for at least another 5 years. On the back of that's what he was hoping to manage his exit, and that's just not going to happen. And it's if he can continue to run a nursery cost effectively. So that is going to affect parents going back to work, because if they haven't got affordable childcare, you're going to have one parent maybe dropping out of the workforce. So which will be obviously not the ideal. It's not what we want. It's not going to boost the growth that everybody wants.
Jamie, I think the only other thing I would say is the national insurance in and of itself is tough, the two elements, but I think, as you're probably going to come on to, it's the national living wage coupled with the national insurance and putting the two together so people go, oh my goodness, so that's up X £100, but now the national insurance rise, or sorry, the national living wage rise of 6.7 when inflation is in around 2.5%. I think it's a double whammy. As I've talked to customers, they go, I could cope with one, Andrew, but two together, because I think most people have in their head, it might be a 3-4% rise this year, not the 6.7. And it's a knock-on effect at supervisor level all the way up. And in my industry, food costs have been going up, but they've actually stabilized in the last 12 months. But the reality is the labor cost is now what's hurting. And yet it stifles demand because Joe Public go out and they say, that's really expensive to eat out. And they kind of think it's all about the food, and they forget the increased cost of labor is what the restaurateur, the coffee shop owner is having to put on to their prices. And it's a kind of vicious cycle at that point.
It is very much so, and we were already finding that our clients, our restaurant clients, were really struggling to recruit restaurant staff, particularly chefs. So it's just going to be even harder now for them.
It's really interesting to hear all of that from you both. The minimum wage stuff is definitely something we will come back to very shortly. But before we do, Christopher, obviously for a manufacturing business like yourselves, it's perhaps slightly, or you're perhaps slightly less able to look towards things like AI to help improve your productivity and help mitigate some of these additional costs. I don't know what kind of, as a business, you've been looking at as the main things for you to help cope with these rising costs.
Well, we do have AI. We do use it. We use it for optimizing our website, for optimizing content blocks, dynamic content blocks, dynamic emails, etc. So we do use it quite extensively for that. But you know, the NI and the national minimum wage are not the only costs we're facing in business. We have a terrific pressure from energy. Energy costs have gone up exponentially in the last few years. We also have a huge pressure to reach net zero. And as a manufacturer, of course, we use energy, but we are being forced by governments to reach net zero at a breakneck speed. And that means investment. And we have very little tax incentive to do this. In fact, it's even worse because if we put solar panels, for example, on the roofs, we then find that we get penalized by additional business rates. So we're penalized for getting our way towards net zero. So the NI and the national minimum wage, it is the combination of those two, which is so serious. And as Andrew pointed out, with training with young people, we need at least £27,000 to pay for a minimum wage person before we start paying for the training. So the real danger of these tax rises is that we and thousands of other businesses like us have to either put up the prices or cut jobs or stop training and stop hiring. And we certainly will have to probably halve our apprenticeship program. And bear in mind that there are 900,000 young people aged 16 to 24 not in work. That's 1 in 7 young people are economically inactive. It's absolutely crucial for our country that we get young people into the jobs market and give them good jobs right from the start. Because if they don't get work by the age of 24, we halve the chance of them ever working in their lifetime by 50%. So this national minimum wage is much more influential than meets the eye here. Andrew pointed out it changes the differentials because if you don't raise salaries all the way up the spectrum at the same rate, which we can't, then you reduce the differentials. So being a supervisor earns you very little more than not being a supervisor. So why be a supervisor? Why bother training up? Why bother getting extra skills when you can get nearly the same money to have low or no skill? That's quite serious, actually. If you look at the rises, we've had 6.7% rise in national minimum wage this year. We had 9.7 last year and 6.6% the previous year. All those figures are way more than the rate of inflation. And that alone will push up inflation. We're inflicting inflation on our own economy deliberately. So the NI is a sort of double whammy. I think There's a further element, I'm afraid, which will hit us, which is that this ends up hollowing out communities. And communities like ours, we're a former coal mining town in Derbyshire. When the coal mines shut and the textiles industry went overseas, the men lost their jobs and the women lost their jobs, and you end up with very high unemployment. Our town is in the 10% lowest socioeconomic group in the country, and it depends very heavily on long-term employers like us. And we've stayed loyal to local people and local jobs for 63 years. And if these jobs are lost, you hollow out the community. And that's really quite serious. And that, of course, increases the welfare cost on the government. Now, I would love to support the government, and I really would welcome if they could give us business friendly taxes and help us to get people into work. I've got, of course, a couple of ideas of how that could be done, but this NI and the national minimum wage, the combination is pretty serious for British economy.
Before Philippa,
because
go on.
Sorry.
No, Philippa, please go.
Because they're also, for the national minimum wage, they're trying to get rid of the age banding. I mean, the 18 to 20-year-old rate has gone up by 16.3%, which is way above, way above inflation.
I think that leads really nicely to what I wanted to cover next. Before I go on to that, just a reminder to all of our audience, please do feel free to pop your questions on any of the topics that we're discussing, or any other wider thoughts that you have on our three panelists and their businesses. It's always great to have your feedback. Christopher, you mentioned there the extent to which economic inactivity, especially amongst young people, is really a massive issue affecting our economy. I think we have nearly 10 million economically inactive people in the UK, which is equivalent to roughly 25% of our adult workforce, which is obviously a massive increase since COVID. As I said at the start, the Johnson Nation was really delighted to see the government's plan to get Britain working again. And we think this is something that's a really positive ambition, and it's been really echoed by many of the businesses that we've been speaking to over the past few months. But we have seen things like the Federation for Small Businesses survey, which I think interviewed roughly 5,000 small and medium-sized businesses. And the findings from that were quite stark, in that about 50% of businesses said that they were going to be hiring less workers as a result of recent changes. But in particular, that would have a massive impact on their recruitment practices. So they'd be much less likely to, for example, hire people with a poor work history, or avoid hiring those who have been long-term out of work, or haven't had a job before, which is obviously a real barrier to getting Britain working again. So it'd be great to hear all three of your thoughts, in particular on the impact that these changes and other changes that we've talked about this morning might have on the ability of businesses to get those people, those not employed, those young, not in employment, education, or training, those long-term out of work, those that perhaps have came from a medical history. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Andrea, I don't know if you want to come in first on this one.
So let me give you one thought for I suppose the UK, and maybe contrast that with the Republic of Ireland. So I mean, one of the obvious ones for me is that the actual taxation rate, if you've worked 20 hours plus, so we have a number of staff who work part-time and they'd like to work to 30 hours, but actually their benefits get withdrawn, and actually they pay an effective tax rate of nearly 60%. It is economic madness. And to be fair, the Conservative government didn't tackle it either. And it would not cost us a lot. And that is about getting people into work. They want to work, but they're going to get tackled in terms of losing certain benefits, which seems mad to me. And if you contrast that, we talked about national living wage and NI, you contrast that with the Republic, where we now look and say, actually, it may be cheaper to employ a member of staff down there. Why has Ireland boomed economically? I think two things. One, they have a corporation tax rate of 12.5%. It's worked. They've had it for nearly 15 odd years, and they've seen huge economic growth. And even in an industry like mine, hospitality, they put the VAT rate up to 13.5%. There was an outcry, but the new government, the new coalition government that will start at the end of January, are going to reduce that VAT rate to 9%. Put that in context, because we don't have a border in this island. if I'm in Newry, which is in Northern Ireland, or Dundalk, which is in the Republic of Ireland, they are 4 miles apart. Yet a restaurateur will have a difference of 10.5% in his VAT rate. That is madness. And it's those kind of stimulate the economy, but also make policies that actually make work pay, I think is a big one.
Definitely. Christopher, do you want to come in there?
Well, make work pay. Absolutely right. We need not just that. We need hungry young people who've got high ambition and high aspiration, and who are well prepared for the workplace. There is a huge risk for us in hiring a new person, particularly a young person. And one of the big risks is the attitude and whether that young person will fit into the culture of the organization and put their back into it and want to learn and become a valuable contributing member of staff. You mentioned the number of economically inactive people, 10 million. I think it's 9.3 million people are economically inactive, even though the government talks about an unemployment figure of much, much, much less than that. The cost of those economically inactive working age people is 59.9 billion. That's the amount we are paying to pay people of working age to not work. And we as business are having to fund all that somehow. So I suggest that we turn that around and start getting people into work from a young age. And we've made a good attempt at that, I hope, with our school or schools. And I'm very proud to say that we have 0 NEETs coming out of our sixth form, which means every single pupil or student leaving has gained a job or an apprenticeship or a place in higher education. That means 0 unemployment from our school, and our school is the only secondary school in the town. And we've done that by a very careful employability curriculum, which gives young people those attitudinal skills. It gives them emotional intelligence, it gives them team working, it gives them confidence, gives them careers awareness and real experience of what careers are about. So they can not only get a job, but get on in that job and become a supervisor or a leader and add value. And something like that could easily be expanded across more schools or even all schools in the UK. And if we did that, and by the way, this is at no cost to the taxpayer, we could get those young people into work, and that will boost the economy massively, so that instead of paying people to not work, they are in work and they're contributing. But there's 2 sides to that. We not only need to prepare young people with great employability skills so they're eager to work, we also need a magnet so that employers have an incentive to take young people on, and an incentive to work with schools, and an incentive to sponsor students through university so they have no tuition fees. And all of this could be done with a suitable skills tax incentive. I think it's an absolute no-brainer, and it would be a transformational step for the current government to take.
Very much so. But what about all the issues now about employers really not doing a recruitment freeze? And that's where that problems come in. Talking about graduates, people leaving school, but also the graduates coming out of university, you've got no experience, looking for their first job. They're all, hungry, but employers are just not hiring. And I think we're going to see more of that. It's going to be harder for them. They're going to be socially and economically inactive. But they're going to have large loans that they've got to pay off. And if they don't pay those off, they get wiped after, I think it's 30 years. So who's going to pay that? That's the taxpayer again. So knock-on effect could last for years.
Christopher, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, do you want to answer that? That's exactly the problem. So we're being hit from both sides. We're being penalised for employing people, penalised for taking the risk of hiring young people, penalised with the national minimum wage, penalised with, of course, employability or lack of employability with the rules and regulations around, rights from your first day of employment, etc. And there's no incentive to take people on. But wouldn't it be better, for example, if we were to hire a young person, if, for example, during their apprenticeship, If it costs us 27,000 to hire that person, and maybe 30,000 with a bit of training, maybe half of that could be offset against our tax bill for the duration of the apprenticeship. That would be a tremendous incentive for employers to hire young people. And that incentive paid by the government off our tax bill would, of course, be paid back within 4 or 5 years by the national insurance that would be generated by that new employer. It was a huge return on investment, and our own calculations show that this would improve the productivity of Britain by about 10%.
It's a very, very stark
Easy.
figure, Christopher, isn't it? And
Yeah.
this is something that we've actually been discussing a lot at the Jobs Foundation about how we really stimulate the ability for businesses to hire these people that have been long-term out of work. I know something that we've been looking at very strongly is, for example, national insurance breaks for businesses that hire those that are coming from long-term unemployment, which in terms of costs could very much be offset by decreases in the welfare bill as a result of people coming back from welfare into employment. I'm conscious that we've got lots of audience questions coming in. So from Laura, Laura has asked, what do you think the 3 best interventions would be to stimulate the ability to hire and to address those 10 million economically inactive people? So Laura's mentioned things like the 4-day working week and better enforcement of working time laws. What would you guys as top 3 policies be on this front? Andrew, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I think some of what Christopher's doing is fantastic, and I just want to say that's amazing to see. I mean, my one would be that kind of 20 to 30 hours, drop the effective tax rate, don't cut benefits, in that 10 hours, or taper them much more sensibly. So it's maybe an effective tax rate of 10 or 20%, not the 40 to 50%. I also think that we have touched on it, but the new employment bill, some of the regulations in that are crazy at the same time because all 3 of us want to bring on staff. We actually we care about our staff, but you're then saying, well, they have these rights from day one, you can't do this, and it's got to be a partnership. Rachel Reeves pre-government talked about a partnership and growth. There is a reset opportunity that Labour are going to be in power for the next 4.5 years at least, so we have to do that reset. And I think some of what Christopher talked about in the tax breaks and things offer the incentive for us as employers to want to actually add people to our payroll.
Super interesting. Philippa, do you want to come in?
I'm not sure how to legislate, but actually, for small businesses, most employers are good employers, and I think we try and help all of our staff, from day one anyway. And bashing us over the head with a few bad employers is not helping anybody. And I think sometimes the employees have a duty to, in some ways, to not assume that employers are the baddie. And that's really hard. We are there to try and help them. One of our values is progression, and we really want to see all of our staff progress. And we are hampered at every turn on this one at the moment, it feels like.
Completely. I think your point there on the vast majority of businesses being very good employers and doing so much for their staff is so true. At the Jobs Nation, we spent the past year traveling the country, interviewing businesses and different business leaders as part of our foundational research, very aptly labeled 2 million jobs. And I think what really comes through as part of that research is just how much business leaders do on the ground in the communities that they work in, providing opportunities through jobs and employment and trading, but also some of the other massive things that businesses do. Christopher, I know you've already talked about some of those policies that you'd like to see. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Okay, three policies which would change the landscape for British economy. Number 1, Ofsted, to recognise employability, something along the lines of our 6 employability benchmarks would be transformational for young people. Number 2, we need a skills tax rebate along the lines I've described, so that employers are incentivized to hire young people and offer apprenticeships. It's not acceptable to carry on with the apprenticeship levy That is a tax on jobs, not an incentive to train. And it's not just the large companies who want to train. We need every company in every sector, from large to small, from the north to the south of the country, to put their shoulder to the wheel of training. And we need to get thousands of young people eagerly into work. Number 3, delay the increase in national insurance, certainly for SMEs, for 1 year. I hope that helps.
No, that's all fantastic. Thank you, all three of you. I suppose the government has obviously inherited a tricky fiscal situation. Rachel Reeves talks about her black hole, and businesses have been the kind of people that have been stuck with the burden of filling that. I suppose if you had if all three of you had one sentence or one message to say to Rachel Reeves, what would you want to say to her, Philippa?
What I want to say, where to start? We want to grow, and that's really, but we can't grow if we are spending all our investment money on just keeping the business going. And that's what we've always wanted to try to invest in the business and in the people of the business. But we not, if we're having to fund, for example, the increase in NI, that's not going to help businesses grow. If we're not recruiting, if we're not spending that investment, we are not businesses, the small businesses are not the ones taking out a whole load of money in profit. We are not. It's the investment. It's not having the money to invest again.
Definitely.
So.
Andrew.
Okay. One, I would say trust business and listen. The ideas of today and lots of organizations like yourselves, listen to them and actually trust us. Philippa said this, and businesses are inherently good, and the people who run them are inherently good. I think secondly, stop creating a divide between the public and private sector. There has been a huge, national insurance doesn't apply here, but it does apply here, and lots of those regulations. And I just think pitting two sides together is never a good solution. Let's work together. We need the public sector need the private sector. Let's work together. And the third one, which may not be as popular, but Christopher made this point, our energy costs are 4 times higher than the US. We need cheap energy, and I'll say it, we need to wise up on some of our net zero expectations, and we need to think about what that means for the UK economy.
Christopher. Yes, so Rachel Reeves, we want to work with you. We want to support you. So please act now, act quickly. Support business to support government. We need to work together to make Britain competitive.
I think that's a lovely message from all three of you. I'm conscious that we've got 5 or so minutes left, and I can see lots of questions coming through. To end, let's put a question, and do not worry if we don't get time to go to your question. I'll make sure to share all of your thoughts and feedback with all of our panel. But I want to go to Gary Laybourne, a great friend of the Jobs Foundation from Coach Core. So Gary says that Christopher mentioned some of the tax incentives to businesses to change the picture when it comes to utilising apprenticeship levy money. And Coach Core are currently lobbying for the £3 billion in unspent apprenticeship levy to be used to support some of the employer costs that are willing to engage at some of those lower level apprenticeships. All three of you, do the panel agree? Do you think some of these changes would be enough to change the opinions of businesses on hiring young apprentices?
Can I answer on apprentices? I think it's the apprenticeship levy. Now is the moment to cancel it. It has been an absolute disaster. In manufacturing, the number of apprenticeship starts has reduced by 42% since the levy was introduced. Now, tinkering around the edges, if we're really lucky, it might rise a bit. So we've only reduced by, say, 32%. But that's not what we need. We need apprenticeships to go steeply up not down. So I think it should be cancelled. So instead of only penalising very large corporates, we have an incentive for all companies, large and small, in all sectors. It's high time we did that and make it simple. Really, we've got to have an incentive. We've got to want to employ young people. We've got to want to get them into jobs. We've got to get this employability and get them hungry. Britain has done this in the past, and we can do it again.
Really lovely message. Philippa, Andrew, is there anything that you'd want to add to that?
Mine would be a slightly different take on it. It's not just the apprentice, but obviously I sit here in Northern Ireland, which is a very small part of the UK, and we have our own executive. You look at us as a test case for I would say it, but reducing VAT and hospitality. What is a different corporation tax? We are a perfect plaything, 1.8 million, out of the UK population, to try different policies. And I think that would be my other encouragement. Try at regional levels. We talked about free ports and different zones and things, but what does that actually look like? Let's throw some money at it and see if it works.
And Philippa.
Not much to add, but I think having an incentive for employers, we are handcuffed so much, not just with the tax, but the rules and regulations. We want to do the right thing, we want to help, but it's very, very hard for us to do so.
I think that's a very fitting point to kind of end on this morning. So I think this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. We've talked a lot about some of the issues with changes to NI, amongst other things like the Employment Rights Bill and increases to the minimum wage. But I think the tone of this conversation is very much reflective of the wider attitude of the business community towards the government and some of their goals, in that business wants to help. Business is here to support the government to achieve their goals, whether that be on employment, whether that be on training, whether that be on economic growth. And I think we've been very lucky to hear from all three of you some very practical solutions about how businesses can be supported to do all of that. So let's hope that those ministers in charge of these areas listen to the great perspectives of you guys and the wider business community. As I said before, I'll make sure to all of you have popped questions in the Q&A box. I'll make sure to share that feedback with our panelists. But I'd like to thank everybody for attending and listening. It's a great privilege to have you all. And thank you in particular to our three very fantastic panelists who have all been very grateful and giving up their time and giving us all their insight from the ground on all these areas. So with that note, I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their day, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.